Welcome to Web Handling. My name is Dave Roysum. I am super excited to continue our new series called The Top 10 Secrets of Web Handling, where I share my top 10 tips and tricks on how to improve your web machine, your product, and your process. In this show, we begin at the very end of the process, your customer. I know your time is precious, so let's get started. Let us begin with what is the most important and the most difficult to answer question, and that is, who is your customer? Duh, you say. It's obvious. It's the company who we sell our product to. But you don't sell just to a company. You sell to people. Specifically, that is the person or persons in the purchasing department who placed the order. However, that group knows ordering and accounting far better than webs and web handling. Instead, perhaps a better person to try and please might be their QA department. Still, a case may be made that your customer's operator or process engineer might be closer to your product than your customer's QA department. In any case, these customers are in a different building and more often in a different company. It can sometimes be helpful to think a bit more broadly. That is, perhaps you could consider your own QA or your own sales department to be your customer. You are offering your time and talents in exchange for acceptance that can be translated to career development and promotions and money. In that regard, perhaps it is really your boss that is your most immediate customer because you exchange your time and talents for a fat paycheck if you do well. Or if that is true, then it is perhaps you yourself that is your customer. By that I mean that if you are a great product to sell to all of these customers, then complaints will be reduced a bit. Still, who in the heck can serve all of these customers equally well? We will see shortly that it is quite naive to think that you can. But for now, consider this. If you want to serve your end-use customer the best as you possibly can, then you would reject anything that had even the slightest hint of risk of being less than perfect. If you did that, however, your boss would be super unhappy at the now higher levels of internal rejection. The subject of the balancing act of setting specific rejection criteria is called producer-consumer risk. It is not uncommon for me to work with multi-party disputes. Sometimes it is just a supplier and a single customer. Sometimes it can be 3 or more parties. This can be challenging for the reasons just given and more. So how do I navigate those shark-infested waters? Simple. It does not matter who pays my bill. The customer is always the web. It works like this. If the web ain't happy, then ain't nobody happy. Of course, the same is true of the operators, so I also pay super close attention to what they say as well. We communicate primarily with language, though some would incorrectly think that communication is with numbers, such as test values and specifications. Let me illustrate this with a brief story showing about the dangers of assuming you know what is upsetting your customer by the words or the numbers that they use. A tissue supplier got a complaint from a Mexican customer for low basis weight. The supplier paid the small claim without further thought or investigation. A month later, they got another claim for the same problem, low basis weight. This time, the supplier looked at the roll ID number provided and checked out previous test results for that roll. Nothing was out of spec. So the supplier gave it no more thought and paid the claim again. Finally, a couple of weeks later, they got another complaint for the same problem, low basis weight. This time, the supplier asked the customer to send a sample back of that low basis weight so they could measure it in their test lab. The supplier opened up the envelope to find a sample with a hole in it. This was not just low basis weight, it was no basis weight at all. While you might dismiss this war story as an issue with people whose second or third language is English, think again. My experience is that communication is much more risky when both parties are fluent in English. The reason is you assume what the other is saying. Language was all over the map for certain defects. That is why we wrote the Roll and Web Troubleshooting Guide. Among its many uses, it standardizes language for common defects. For example, corrugations is the proper term for defects that are sometimes called ropes and sometimes improperly called tin cans because the tin can is an entirely different defect. Since clear communication is so absolutely fundamental to troubleshooting web and web handling related problems, I have written the Roysum Dictionary, which has been incorporated in various forms in about a half dozen books, including the must-have Roll and Web Defect Book, which is an encyclopedia of some 500 defect names, aliases, causes, cures, and etc. So now we have chosen our customer, and now we are all clear about the words that everyone is using because we're all speaking the near universal language just described. Yet, there still remains some serious landmines left when it comes to choosing what to work on. These three choices include what is said, what is wanted, and what is really needed. Mark my words, they are all different, as illustrated by these two stories I will share. The first story is about my wife who decades ago when I was building an experimental aircraft frequently said, "You are always working on that stupid airplane." However, what she really meant was that my new hobby was quite dangerous and she did not approve. Turns out my wife was right, as is often the case. I later did crash my airplane, as is documented in Web301.07. The second story is one of my first jobs as a consultant, where I was asked to survey a two-drum winder. I dutifully looked over the old machine and wrote a report listing all the areas where the machine could be improved by maintenance or upgrade. A few days later, I called the client and asked about the report. He said, "That's not what we were looking for." He said what we were looking for was a report that listed the machine deficiencies and to include that a new machine was needed so that they could budget it for the next year. Of course, if he had said that first, that would have saved us both some time, but he didn't want to appear so blunt nor steer me and risk inappropriate conclusions. This show is getting a bit long, so let's close with best practices for effective communication that is essential for effective problem solving, whether it be web handling or something else entirely. Note that the traditional route of operator complaining to process engineer, who complains to purchasing, who might complain to the plant manager, who complains to the supplier's plant manager, who complains to the process engineer, who then complains to the operator, who saw more of that defect than almost anyone else. That simply does not work. Bypass all of this BS. Send your best operator and your best process engineer to talk to your customer's plant and talk directly to their operator and their engineer. Customers have an obligation to allow such visits if they expect compensation for claims. I hope you have enjoyed this discussion of customers and communication, both essential topics to being a good web handler. Stay tuned for next week's show, where we will talk about a very important topic: money. If you have a topic you would like to hear about, let me know in the comment section below. If you found any of these stories to be interesting or useful, please like and share and subscribe. See you next time.